Good afternoon, Sloane Wehman from Bryn Mawr School. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. You've got another week or two left of senior year at Bryn Mawr. Are you excited? What is sort of the mood as a senior right now?
I'm really excited, I guess, to graduate. I've been at Bryn Mawr for 14, almost 15 years. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's going to be, I guess, fun to be in a new environment for college, but at the same time, I've been at Bryn Mawr my whole life, so leaving is going to be kind of a sad moment.
And you guys just had your big dance festival thing. What is that called?
Gym drill.
Gym drill.
It was this past Friday.
I know that's a big deal at Bryn Mawr.
It is a big deal. Well, the seniors, we all had we got to run down the field. It's symbolic of passing like a banner to the younger class, so everybody kind of moves up a grade. And for us, since there's no grade past senior year, we kind of are graduated in the mind of the gym drill celebration, but not officially graduated yet.
Now, do you like that tradition? Is that a fun one, or is that one that people sort of just dread? It's something that you guys have to do.
I think it's really fun.
Yeah.
I love dancing, and that's basically the entirety of gym drill, so I enjoy the event, and if the weather cooperates, then it's always a fun event to be at.
Mm-hmm. And you're a ballerina, right? You're into ballet.
I am a ballerina.
Tell me about that.
Well, I've been dancing for, I think, 15 years, almost the same amount of time I've been at Bryn Mawr, but I love ballet. It's something I've always done. I've tried so many different sports, but ballet is the only thing that really stuck with me from childhood, but I love performing and I love being on point, and I think it's just really awesome thing to do.
It's a tough sport, right?
Definitely a tough sport.
Yeah, the balance and the athleticism it requires. I mean, I think people separate like sports and athleticism from dance in some ways, but I think that a lot of dancers are some of the best athletes out there because it takes so much focus, dedication, athleticism, balance, all of that. I mean, I know it's a very highly pressurized sport a lot of the time. What is it sort of, how's that, do you like that part of it?
I do like the pressure. I find it as a good way to push myself as a performer and as a dancer in general, just having a lot of constructive criticism. Your teacher will give you compliments, but also a lot of feedback on your movements and your technique and stuff that you have to apply every single class in order to actually get better and to improve. So I like the pressure. It pushes me just to do better. But I think that the ballet environment especially is highly rigorous, and it can be difficult at times, especially with the amount of time that you put into making yourself try to be like a perfect model of a dancer. Then it can chip away sometimes at you mentally, but I find it to be really, really fun and something like I can always have something to chase. There's always some goal that I can achieve.
Now, do you do that every single day, or are there seasons for ballet and dance, or is it pretty much all year long?
It's all year long, and some people choose to take off for the summers, but I usually go to a ballet program. I have usually gone to a different state for the programs, and they last 5 to 6 weeks. But ballet is year-round, and I used to train almost daily, but I've kind of, with the rigor of junior spring and then senior college applications, I kind of reduced my schedule to allow for more time to focus on schoolwork and to get college apps in. But this summer I'm definitely going to keep up my training.
Nice. Are you going to keep doing it in college?
Yes,
okay.
I am.
Now, do you stay with ballet, or do you do some other different styles of dance once you sort of master ballet, or you're really into ballet? Do you branch off into more contemporary types of dance, or do you stick with ballet?
At my old studio, once you got to a certain level, you were allowed to take contemporary classes. And it was mandatory, but I'm more of a ballet person, so I tried contemporary. I didn't really love it. So I tried to pull back on the number of contemporary classes I took because ballet is really just my favorite.
Gotcha.
And I've dabbled in a couple of other different styles, but ballet is really my preferred medium.
Have you had the same coach your whole life?
I did up until 2 years ago.
Okay.
And she left my old studio, and so when she left, it was really sad for me, and it just wasn't the same at the studio. So I had her for, I think, 14 years.
Wow.
And then I have a new instructor who I really like at a different program. So
Great. Well, that's awesome that you're going to continue doing that next year, and you're going to Stanford next year.
I am going to Stanford.
Wow, that's awesome. Good
Thank
for you. How did you find Stanford? How did you decide on that school? I mean, it's an easy decision, but how did that whole process, come to fruition?
Initially, I didn't want to go to the West Coast for college. I really wanted to stay on the East Coast. But I reached out to different professors at classics programs at different universities to ask about research. And so the two professors who responded to me out of the maybe like 25 or 26 that I emailed were from Harvard and Stanford. So I worked with them both for research for I think almost 2 years now. I'm still working with them. One of them is actually my mentor for my Edith Hamilton project. But my mentor at Stanford he was very encouraging. He was like, oh, you should totally come and visit. And I wanted to have like a face-to-face conversation about the topic of my Edith Hamilton, which I actually hadn't proposed as like my project yet. It had really just been like a personal research interest. So I scheduled to go out and visit Stanford and meet with him. And I was a little reluctant just because I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to really love it out west. I'm kind of decided on the East Coast. But when I visited, I was just blown away. And when I stayed there for 2 days, and after I left, I was like, Stanford's my number one. Wow. I have to go there.
So you just reached out to college professors to have some sort of mentorship from them, or why? What led to that?
So I'm really interested in hubris, and it's something that just fascinates me. I'm really interested in philosophy and ethics, and kind of the combination of those two fields along with classics is something that I'm really passionate about. And so I had this idea to research hubris in the ancient world and how it connects to modern day, because I've seen research on hubris, but never have I seen it like talked about in the modern context, because the term is actually misinterpreted from what it actually is as a classical term. So I really wanted to explore how it evolved and changed over time. And so in doing that, I wanted to reach out and talk to professors about my ideas, and then also inquire if there were any like unpaid internship opportunities or volunteer spots. And I reached out like all across Maryland and the East Coast, and then I took it out to Stanford because I figured why not. The two biggest guys in classics are from Stanford and Harvard, and those like surprisingly were the two who responded. Yeah. So it was really incredible.
I really like that. Well, I want to talk about hubris and your interest in the classics a little bit, but I really like the fact that you just reached out to places, because that's sort of the same story. You know, I went to Harvard, and Harvard was not recruiting. I was a lacrosse player, and they were not recruiting me for lacrosse. And I was looking at some other schools in the Northeast, and I sort of just picked up the phone and called the head coach at Harvard and got on the phone with him, and he was like, oh, you're interested, you should definitely come up for a visit. And I did, and I ended up going there, and it was a great, really great opportunity for me, obviously. But the idea of just picking up the phone or sending an email to someone, I don't think a lot of people have that quality. I think that's one of my biggest forms of advice for people like Gilman who are looking at colleges or maybe looking to get recruited places is you never know what's going to happen if you call someone at these schools or send an email, right? And I think the fact that you did that is pretty awesome.
Thank you.
So that's great. So tell me about this interest in hubris, because that's also sort of uncanny that you just have this passion or interest in this idea of hubris.
So I think it really started in 8th grade, like just the hubris part. My classics interest has gone so far back in like when I was in 3rd grade, but hubris specifically was of interest to me when I read the Odyssey, and specifically the character of Odysseus really stood out to me, and kind of just his personality and the way that he carried himself and like what inner motives he had to carry out certain actions was really fascinating to me, and I really wanted to look into that. And so in 8th grade, I had that idea, and then I kind of let it go. But then in 10th grade, I rekindled the idea, and I thought, you know what, like, I think that I could probably do research on this, even if it's like an independent project. And so I started looking into more instances of hubris, and after researching the actual term, I realized it's misunderstanding, that the actual word for hubris in the ancient world has been so far lost in like our modern world, and we're calling politicians and celebrities hubristic when they technically don't really fit that true ancient definition of hubris. And so when I found that out, I was like, oh, I should totally research that specifically, how the term has been lost over time, and do an exploration of the modern and the ancient aspects.
So when I think of hubris, I think of the story, I think it's Hans Christian Andersen, The Emperor Has No Clothes. And the emperor, I forget the specifics of it, but, you know, the emperor is parading around the streets and, you know, is blinded by his power, basically, that he doesn't realize that he's not even wearing any clothes, and he doesn't realize the reaction of amongst all the citizens who are pointing at him and laughing because he's so blinded by his pride. What is the ancient definition of hubris, and how has that been lost?
So the ancient definition really speaks to viewing yourself as being equivalent to or better than the gods, and there are a lot of mythology stories to back that. So a couple that I looked at were the story of Icarus, who is like the flying too close to the sun. He had the wings and he flew, and he disobeyed the instruction of Daedalus, the person who made the wings, and he thought, oh, well, I can do this because I'm simply better. The wings, he disregards the information that he's given because he simply thinks that he can because he's better. Another one is Arachne. She claimed to be better than Athena at weaving. So she challenged her to a contest, and she technically did win. But kind of that idea of thinking a mortal specifically thinking themselves to be better than a god is what drives hubris, and that's evident through a lot of different historical accounts too, with different leaders who in the ancient world believed that they were, they deserved to be treated like a god, and they paraded around thinking that they were better. So the modern day definition of hubris, at least from what I've seen in my research, has just been, being prideful, being arrogant, having a large ego. And also in modern day, hubris and narcissism are very much like kind of combined into one idea, which they're two very separate things, both of which derive from like ancient terms, but hubris is so much different. More.
It's more.
It's so much more than just having an ego. It's being a diva, comparing yourself to that of a god. It's like if you were a celebrity and you thought that you were better than, or you compared yourself in way to like a religious figure, that would be considered hubris, not just having an ego.
Oh, okay. So it's got to be, it's like the deepest sense of arrogance that there is. Yeah. And is that quality of like being blind to certain things, is that an element of hubris? Like you're blind to, I don't know, like the Emperor Has No Clothes story, like you're blind to the way that the citizenry is reacting, or you're blind to the fact that you're actually not that great. Is that part of hubris?
I mean, that could be part of it. I know that there are a lot of instances, especially in the modern day, where celebrities are kind of out of touch to a certain extent of how much hubris they're expressing. I think that there was a quote that I had out of like a news article about Kim Kardashian, and she kind of proudly admitted to being self-absorbed and being totally full of herself, but it's not really a moment of pride. That's not something to be proud of. And I think that whoever wrote that article wasn't really complimenting her by saying, you have a really inflated ego, you have, this really high like view of yourself. So she took it with pride, but it really wasn't something to be that proud of. And so there is a sort of blindness to your hubris and your ego. So that's definitely like a prominent thing throughout the stories.
What modern examples other than the Kim Kardashian example are you looking at or focusing on where you hear that word hubris?
So Kim K was a big one, and then Elon Musk is definitely a figure that I've looked at. He has, a very large tech empire, and he's a very successful individual, but he does think incredibly highly of himself. And I think that people who do have hubris, at least in the modern world, have very high levels of success. But it's kind of how they carry themselves with that success that determines whether they're hubristic or not. So Elon Musk was one. I'm trying to generally stay out of the politics, just because I have like a pretty neutral view on a lot of things. I didn't want, especially for my Edith Hamilton, when I deliver my speech, to get flooded with like politics questions.
Yeah.
So I generally stayed out of that. But another like celebrity figure that I looked at, there was one specific quotation from Kanye West that was something along the lines of, like, I'm disappointed that I'll never be able to see myself perform live. So saying stuff like that, where you're so invested with yourself and, you know, you have such a big self-view that, you know, you even say like, oh, I'm so sad that I can't see myself perform. So those three, Kim K, Elon Musk, and Kanye West are three pretty big figures that I was looking into. But I think Elon Musk is definitely one of the prominent like hubris examples in modern day.
So let's talk about Elon Musk, because I really respect Elon Musk for a lot of reasons, because first of all, I don't know how a human can do all that he does in a day. Like his aims for society and the potential of society are so high that a lot of what he says and talks about, I find hopeful, but I know that people see him as controversial too, for some reason.
I don't really see him as controversial. And I think that the reason why I think he's viewed as hubristic is because he has so many successes that it's generally seen that because he's so successful, he has this empire of, you know, tech industries, and he's such a hard worker, and that he, like, nothing was really handed to him, but he genuinely worked hard to attain what his goals are. I think that because he has such like a large empire that he's sitting on top of, people view him as hubristic, because how can a man do all of these things? So that's where the hubris plays in with Elon Musk specifically, is he's so successful that how can a human have accomplished all of this? And then that's why people are like, oh, well, you know, he's not a man, but he's not a god. Like he's some limbo in between. But I think that's what I wanted to explore through Elon Musk, is he's so incredible that he doesn't really fit the like accomplishments of just a man. So
it's interesting though, when you described hubris a little bit earlier, we were talking about the definition as comparing humans to gods. And I think with the technology example, for instance, which maybe is a little bit different than the Kanye West, Kim Kardashian example, with technology, you are almost playing a god in some sense, like taking, you know, Elon Musk X and the decision he makes with that platform, it affects the way that all humans across the world can communicate with each other. So, you know, I think his position as the CEO of X, or the CEO of Tesla, or the CEO of SpaceX, like his ability to make decisions that affect humanity on such a mass scale, is sort of where that term could apply to him, because he is almost playing a god in some sense. Right,
and it could even be a subconscious hubris. I mean, I don't think that he's deliberately thinking, oh, I'm going to play the role of God and control of these things. But I think that with the amount of power that comes from having such control comes maybe like an external view of him as being hubristic, since he has all of that like going for him.
Interesting. I was going to bring up another point. We were talking. I have a 3-person class this semester on British novels. I've got 2 students from Bryn Mawr and there, 1 Gilman student. We're reading a book called Clara and the Sun, and it's about an artificial intelligence, just a robot, and it's really interesting because it's narrated from the perspective of an AI machine. And there's a part where a couple of characters are talking about like starting a business or starting a company, with a technology company. And one of the students in my class said, it's your duty, it's your obligation to think about the repercussions of the company that you're starting. Like, how could, you know, Facebook, for instance, play out in the world if you're Mark Zuckerberg as a freshman in college inventing this thing? And this generated a lot of ethical conversations between us, because in some sense, if you're starting a tech company, like if you're starting Twitter, you don't really know how it's going to play out. You're just thinking, oh, this is going to, help people communicate or help people get connected with each other or be a platform for free speech. But you don't know 10 years down the line how that, that idea will morph into something much larger and potentially different from the way it was intended.
Right. I mean, I love ethics. So that's actually a really interesting, ethical debate is, whether something that you create, should you really, I think that there's, to a certain extent, you can think about the repercussions of creating something that has such a large impact or could have such a large impact. But with that being said, like you mentioned, you can't obviously predict everything that's going to happen with the creation of something that, you have. But yeah, it's definitely hard to think about, you don't know the outcome, but I think that you have to analyze what will happen in order to ethically create something that could be good, even if there is bad that could come from it that you aren't aware of yet.
Now, is that your duty, though, if you're the creator of the tech company, or is that regulators and, is that the law's job to set boundaries on your creation, or is that yours as the creator?
That is a hard question.
It is a tough question, right?
I think that as the creator, it is in a way your responsibility to be involved in the process of understanding. And I think that having the perspectives of people like regulators and administrators, they can, obviously come and say, hey, there's an issue, or we're doing projections and we're figuring out that this might become a problem. I think that as the creator, that should be something that they obviously have the awareness of, but I don't think that they obviously have to collaborate and figure out from other people what the best thing to do is. I don't think that decision can really rest on one person.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about all the creators of social media and how they've used these devices to target us, or colors to draw us in and addict us to these devices and these apps. And if you watch, I forget what the documentary was, The Social Dilemma, or it came out a couple years ago. Right? It's really scary to watch because a lot of these tech founders are like, no way would I let my kids have, Instagram. That's ridiculous. But it's they created it and they had, programmed ideas of how to addict the population and keep them on these apps, but they won't give them to their kids.
Yeah, every single class that I've had that has been philosophy or ethics central has always mentioned social media. And that's something that, especially as a teenager navigating social media, I didn't get social media until I was 16, almost 17. So partially that was because of my parents, but also I didn't really see the need to have it because, when you're 14 years old, I don't really think that it's necessary to have such connection to the outside world, but it's definitely the ethics of social media is something that I've widely debated with friends and with professors, and it's really interesting, especially with the social dilemma with how many people, especially those who run tech companies, don't want their kids to have it. There's so many repercussions that are conscious and subconscious of social media.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We're talking to my American literature class right now about the Transcendentalists and Henry David Thoreau, who pretty much dropped everything in the pre-industrial American scene and went to go live in the woods for 2 years.
And he wrote Walden there, right?
And he wrote Walden there, and
love Walden.
I think there's something to be said for that. And someone in my class actually made a really interesting point today that it's sort of a privileged thing to you have to have some sort of privilege or know that you'll be okay in order to do that. I thought that was an interesting point. But I don't know. I'm reading this book right now called The Anxious Generation, and it's by a psychologist named Jonathan Haidt, and it's just about how phones and technology and the interconnection and the fact that we're always on our devices is not really good for us all mentally, especially kids.
Yeah, no, I talk to a lot of people about the problems that kind of just come with having social media. One of them that I talk about a lot is influence, and kind of the idea that random people on the internet can just influence your actions with repeated exposure. And I think that that's something that's definitely really like scary if you think about it and just how that works. Like if you're a teenager, you're very impressionable, or even if you're really young and you have social media, you're incredibly like impressionable to things that people just put out there. And you think about it, it resonates with you, and then eventually your actions and your thoughts are tailored to reflect the things that you're seeing. And I think that that's definitely seen throughout like our communities here at like Bryn Mawr and Gilman too, and our PCS, with kind of the way that, you know, trends come and go, and how whoever is like the influencer at that point, people come mirror their actions and mirror their mannerisms. So I think that's really interesting, and it's also very scary. But going back to Walden with Henry David Thoreau, that's something that I've tried to do that is kind of a modern parallel to his trip out to the pond, was just giving myself a social media break. I think that I went for a couple of months and I just was like, I'm not going on Snapchat or Instagram for 3 months. And I think I lasted maybe 2.5 before I eventually was like, okay, like it's been a little while, but it was definitely beneficial. Like I saw a good, you know, like increase in just general activity, and I was off my phone a lot. I'm usually not really that active on my phone, but I always set limits for myself on how long I should spend on certain apps, just so I don't go down the black void that is like just scrolling and all that.
Now there's this phone called the Light Phone, and it's I don't know who makes it. It's just called the Light Phone, Light, and it is a black and white phone. It looks sort of like the early iPods, and you can text on it, you can call on it, you can listen to music podcasts on it, but it doesn't have color. It's black and white, and it doesn't have all of the apps that we have on the iPhone or the Google Pixel.
Interesting.
Do you think you could survive with that if you went to college and you got rid of your phone? Do you think you could do that?
I think the color part, I mean, I love art, so I think that the lack of color would probably be something that bothered me, but besides that, I think I'd be fine with like not having all of the apps. Like I have my computer to do work on. I don't really use my phone for much else like than calling and texting people, and then just being on social media for like 10 minutes a day. So
yeah, I really want one. The couple things I'm worried about though that I like taking pictures.
Oh wait, does it not have that?
It doesn't have a camera. I don't think.
That's a problem.
Right, and then maps, like when you're trying to get somewhere, when you're in New York City and you're lost, or you're driving around Baltimore, you don't know where to go. You kind of need maps sometimes.
Yeah.
So those are the two hurdles for me, but other than that, I think I would love this thing.
I did not realize that it wouldn't have photos. I love taking pictures, so I think that would be a challenge, but just not having social media or any other apps doesn't really bother me. So, I mean, I think that I could last with it.
Yeah.
I'd like to try that.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. One of my friends, Gilman alum, just got one. He was showing me the other day. I like the concept. So let me go back to the idea of the influencer, because one thing that you said that I think is very true is that young people now have access to millions of people who, their job is to catch your attention or to generate you to hit that follow button. And when I was growing up, we had Facebook and we had Instagram, and yeah, you could connect with people from the outside world, but mostly you were confined to just your friends. So the idea of comparing yourself to other people was just like, oh, my friend went to that party and I wasn't invited. But now it's like that influencer has those shoes and I have these crappy sneakers, right? And these people are, making money off of your clicks. And I think the world has just gotten so much smaller with influencers and TikTok and the quick videos that people watch all day long.
Yeah, I mean, I made the decision just to not have TikTok. I've never had it like on my phone, just because of that, honestly, is seeing all of those influencers and kind of feeling pressured in a way to have whatever the new thing is, or to buy this, buy that. I think that I would probably fall victim to that to a certain extent. And then also, I can't remember where I was reading this, but on the news there was a study that came out that showed it takes, like, if you just make a new TikTok account, it takes like 7 or 8 minutes to find some sort of like troubling content. And that to me is really disturbing. And, you know, I wouldn't want like in 7 or 8 minutes of just being on an app for me to see something that I'm like, oh yeah, no, I don't like, I don't want to be, you know, influenced by that. There's so many horror stories that come out of TikTok especially that has just deterred me from using it at all.
Right, because nothing's filtered, right? You could see something like incredibly violent or incredibly graphic when, you know, as, you know, Henry David Thoreau would say, he's in the woods. He never sees that. Like, you'll never see that, right? And hopefully you don't have to see a lot of that stuff growing up. But if you have TikTok and you have this camera on the rest of the world, you could see strings of these videos consecutively. And I don't know, if you can prevent that, I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I think that the algorithm definitely does not help with that. Like, the amount of time that you spend on one video influences whatever videos they're going to send to your For You next. And the science behind it is, I mean, really brilliant, but at the same time, it's also scary depending on what, you know, they're trying to push on you or what you're going to continue to keep watching. So depending on what you even spend a longer, like, fraction of a second on influences what they're going to keep giving you. So I think that that's scary. But then in terms of social awareness on social media, one of the reasons why I didn't want to have social media when I was in like early high school was like the fear of missing out. I didn't want to see, you know, a group picture of like my friends hanging out and me not being there. That was something that even if I was invited and just couldn't go, that's something that when I was younger would definitely have bothered me. And I feel like I've matured past that point where if I see people, you know, and I couldn't make a social gathering, that I'm not really affected by it. And I think that that's something that's also a huge part of social media is I've heard, you know, a lot of people who get really bothered by not being at like a concert or at a party or wherever. But I think that that's another like big issue of social media.
Yeah. Interesting. Let's go back to your Edith Hamilton idea. What are you working on for that? And is this the Hubris project? Are you working on that? What is your presentation going to be like?
So the presentation for Edith Hamilton is delivering a 15-minute speech to the Bryn Mawr Upper School and faculty. And so I just had to talk about my research, present kind of what my goal was, what I worked on. It's essentially a year long of research that you did on a very specific topic. And there are other, we call them Ediths, but like other Edith Hamilton scholars who have all researched like a very niche topic that they get to just talk about for 15 minutes. You get everybody's attention, and then there's a questions panel at the end where students and faculty can ask you questions about like your research, your process. But I'm really excited. Mine is on Friday, so
oh wow,
I'm looking forward to it.
Nice.
But I'm really excited just to present, because for me, I haven't been working on it for just a year. It's been kind of an almost like 2-year, almost 3-year long thing since I started really looking into it my sophomore year. But I'm really, really excited.
What do you, so after you're done your presentation, what do you want everyone in the audience to be thinking about? Like, what do you want them to consider about this idea of hubris that will maybe allow them to see the world, politics, technology a little bit differently?
I think that the main message that I want people to take away from my presentation is obviously having a greater appreciation for the ancient origins of hubris. That's definitely something that is overlooked, is the ancient connections that the word has and that the idea has. And I think from a more modern aspect, I want people to take away the idea that, like, you can't compare yourself to a god. Like, I'm Christian, and I guess for me, it'd be, I'm not God. Nobody is, like, the Christian God or whatever religion that you practice. You're not equivalent to whatever God that is you believe in or whatever higher power there is. So I think that kind of having that idea and living life with the idea that you can't think of yourself that highly because there's always going to be a consequence to that. And that's seen through mythology. So I want to use like the mythology as an example as to why even in the modern day, it's not just like a mythological story, but why in the modern day you can't compare yourself to a god because there are repercussions to that.
It's really interesting. One thing that I've been thinking about recently is this idea of what it would be like to be famous. And if you're super famous, especially as a young person, and, you know, think about, like, I don't know, Taylor Swift, for instance. People are constantly telling her how great she is all the time. She can't go anywhere in public without people flooding her, surrounding her, taking pictures with her, asking for autographs. And I just can't imagine the ability to bring yourself down from that. And that's probably why a lot of, you know, famous people, especially young famous people, become drug addicts or are really sad and depressed, and, you know, their adulthoods are ruined from their childhood fame. But the ability to become or get some humility when everyone is telling you how great you are all the time is sort of an aspect of that idea of hubris, I think.
It's definitely hard. Like, I can't imagine being like a famous actor, actress, and being flooded with so many compliments and, like, you know, people doing all these things because they love you so much. I think, like, maintaining this, like, the idea that, like, if I'm a celebrity, I'm human too, or I think that having that mentality as opposed to thinking, oh, I'm so great, that kind of is the way, in my opinion, to start. Mm-hmm. Like, I've thought, oh, well, what if I were famous? What would I do about that? And I think that it would definitely be really difficult to manage your life as somebody who is famous. But you're no better than, like, your biggest fan or even the person who's, like, a new fan. Everybody's a person. There's, besides your accomplishments and besides, like, the career and the platform you've built for yourself, inherently you're the same as, you know, the person who just started following you on Instagram or the person who just decided to listen to your new song. But I think just really thinking about it unbiased, just everybody's a person.
Right, so. Right. I don't know if I'd want to be famous today. There's too much, too many people. You almost have two worlds. You've got the real physical world, and you have the world on your phone, and all the likes and the comments and the praises and the criticisms, and it's got to be difficult to handle.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to do it. There was a period of time, I'm really interested in fashion. I've thought for a while, oh, maybe I'd want to be like a fashion model. That sounds really fun. But I think that the more that I really thought about it, I wanted to do that when I was in 7th grade. And I think that having thought about that for, I guess, 5 years now, I'm just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that I'd really want to do, because the amount of pressure, both externally and internally, people who love you, people who hate you, I think it's just so much on one person that it would be really hard to, even by the point where, like, if you're famous for a few years, I think that some people might find it difficult to, like, separate themselves from, like, their famous persona or whatever it is that they're putting out there for the world. I think it'd be hard to, you know, experience all of that all at the same time.
Yeah, to bring yourself down, but also I think people like Kim Kardashian, Kanye, Elon Musk, if we want to use those examples, they also need to boost themselves up too. Like, you sort of need an edge, or maybe not arrogance, but a lot of confidence to be successful. So it's a tough balance.
I think it also takes stoicism, definitely, to maintain kind of just can't be phased by the negative, and then you can't be overly phased by the positive. It's like a big balancing act, I think, to be in that position. You can't be too self-absorbed, but you also can't think lowly of yourself and say, oh, I don't deserve any of this, like, I don't deserve the compliments for whatever it is that you've done, because then your persona is kind of diminished, and then you could even, like, lose some of your following or lose whatever support that you have. So I think that you have to think highly of yourself to maintain the confidence to be in that position and to be in what's really a job of being an actor or actress, or like a you know, tech guru, an empire. You can't, it's really hard. You can't be too self-absorbed, but you also can't think lowly of yourself.
Yeah, you've got to
it's really hard.
Maintain equilibrium. Yeah. Well, Sloane, let's get to your book, Rex, today. What do you have in mind for us?
So I think the first thing that comes off the top of my head is Dante's Inferno. That's something that I read over the summer as kind of just I'm interested, let me read this book pick. But it's really interesting. So as somebody who's really interested in ethics and philosophy, Dante's Inferno appeals to somebody who's interested in morality, because the entire premise of the book is to look into human sin. Mm-hmm. So that was really interesting to read. And then also something that I picked up was, I think it's called The 48 Laws of Power. That's a really interesting read.
I've seen that cover, maybe. Is it a red cover? It's
like orangish red. It's a very plain cover.
Yep.
I can't think of the author at the moment, but I read it on my way to Rome for spring break, and it was really interesting. Makes you think a lot about, people who are in positions of power and like what the advice, at least from this book, of like how to get and maintain power is really interesting.
Interesting. There's another one by Tim Ferriss called Tools of Titans. I think you'd be interested in that because Tim Ferriss writes a lot about ethics and leadership and morality, and Tools of Titans is a collection of world leaders in different industries and sort of their advice and sort of how they think about fame or power or, it's almost like a book of words of wisdom and stories. So those are great. And I know you've read or done some work on Clockwork Orange, maybe?
Yes, I have. In Ms. Carper's dystopian fiction elective for the second semester, that was my independent research project book pick. But I really loved it. Yeah. I'm a huge dystopian fiction fan. I love fantasy and I love dystopian novels. So that was really interesting. But I think that as somebody who's interested in morals and ethics, there were two kind of big ideas from A Clockwork Orange that really interested me. So one was youth culture, which we kind of talked about with like influence, but that is a prominent theme in A Clockwork Orange. But in terms of violence and violent behavior, because the main character in the novel is a part of like a teenage gang sort of, and he's very influenced by kind of the actions of those around him, and it's really interesting to see how it plays out, like how the actions of certain characters are all influenced off of a greater idea of like what being an adult is, or what it is to like have like to be in control or be a leader, but kind of in a obvious dystopian sense. But the other thing about A Clockwork Orange that was really interesting, which is what I researched, was the idea of free will and rehabilitation. So my thesis for the paper that I wrote was essentially that in order to rehabilitate yourself, like from, I think for, especially in A Clockwork Orange, it's the main character has been imprisoned for his actions, and he's on a path to kind of like get out of prison, but at the end he ultimately, he recognizes that his violent behavior and his brutality isn't something that he wants, and the life of a gangster isn't that appealing to him anymore. So I was trying to figure out how people get from a place of wanting like kind of a gangster life full of crime and then recognizing that that's not what I want. I want to be better than that. I want to have like a normal life. And then exploring how free will plays into that. So it's deliberately a person's choice to rehabilitate. No external force alone can force somebody to get better. But that's really like the morals that I examined in that. But A Clockwork Orange is a wonderful read for people who are interested in dystopian fiction, but also ethics and morals.
That's great. I think that is a great choice, and I haven't read it, honestly. So I'm totally into dystopian fiction and futuristic. My British novels class is pretty future-centered, so I'm definitely going to pick up Clockwork. I know it's a classic. I just haven't read it.
I'd heard all about it, but I'd never actually read it. So when I saw it on like the Ms. Carper had a list of recommended novels for the independent research project, I was like, oh, I have to do A Clockwork Orange. I've seen it everywhere, but I've never actually read it. But I really love it. It's one of my favorites now. So.
Good. Yeah. Well, Sloane, thank you so much for coming in today. It's been a fun conversation. I think we touched on a lot of different subjects. And
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was fun, and best of luck on the Edith presentation and the rest of the year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.